Okay, I think just for time's sake, maybe we'll get things started. I'd like to welcome all of you here today and thank you for attending and being here with us. My name is Melissa Whaling and I'm the Executive Director of Pegasus Institute. And I will be moderating the first panel session of our satellite session entitled Equity and Partnerships for Global Health, a Canadian Perspective. Next slide, please. So again, Pegasus Institute itself is a nonprofit organization that promotes equity, justice, and global health at its nexus with peace and environmental sustainability. And we do that through interactive fora to share in research, education, policy, advocate, and supporting advocacy as well. Next slide. So again, I'd like to welcome all of you, and I'll hand it over to Dorothy for our land acknowledgement.
Hi everyone. Lmic Pinacious is my my clan, and so I accept this role of doing the land acknowledgement with feeling very humble and respectful in that respect. Manapan Nokwe, Nimki Pinacious Todem, as I said, Madajwan Dinjaba, which is my name and where I'm from. In doing this, I had to really think about how we would proceed with it, considering that what we're talking about is global issues, and so we'd like to acknowledge that, or I'd like to acknowledge all of the ancestors who have participated in maintaining and keeping a sustainable environment for us to be able to provide for future generations. And so however you connect with that, however you acknowledge that, wherever you're situated, please do so in your own way. I am currently situated on the Nipissing First Nations territory, the Anishinaabe territory treaty, the Robinson-Huron Treaty, and I would like to acknowledge their ancestors who have ensured that we have this place where we can come together and meet and discuss and share with each other. So I'd just like to say miigwech to the four directions. So miigwech, 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 and miigwech. Aha.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. That was wonderful. So just going through a little bit of our agenda today, and we'll go through all of the details because you'll find out in our really interesting sessions what we're going through. But the first panel today, which is starting right now, will be on designing and assessing equity and partnerships. And that will include an introduction and some panel questions that we would like you as the audience to think about while some of our panelists are speaking and discussing. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Canadian Association for Global Health and different agencies and examples of things. And then we'll go over an overview of equity and what that means in the Canadian context and in Canadian partnerships. And then look at practical tools for addressing challenges to equitable partnerships, because we all know there can be challenges, and we're realistic about that. And then looking at low and middle income country perspectives on working with Canadian partners as well. And then we'll have a chance to discuss as an audience, with the audience. And we'd ask you not to unmute yourselves, but rather to type in the chat if you have a question, and then we'll address it that way, just because we have a larger audience with us today. So thank you very much. Our second panel as well is on decolonization and ensuring and sustaining equity. And then our third panel will be on engagement, prioritizing underserved and unheard voices. So some really interesting stuff coming up. So just speaking a little bit about our panelists, we have a variety of different panelists that are related to Pegasus Institute and our partners on this session today, and we're excited to get things moving along. So what I will do is introduce panel 1 in more detail, and then I'll be introducing the others as we go along through each panel. So again, thank you. So maybe I'll do a little bit about myself maybe at the end, just so you know a little bit more about me, but I'll start with introducing Eva Slowacki. So she's a leader in global health in the global health community in Canada. She is currently the executive director of the Canadian Association for Global Health and has 15 years of experience in global health and international development, focused on health system strengthening and institutional capacity building. She holds a master's degree in health administration and has expertise in evidence-based medicine and information systems in post-Soviet countries in transition. So Eva works extensively in designing, implementing, and monitoring projects for national and international funding agencies. She provides oversight on the Canadian HCV and HIV Knowledge to Action program, the annual Canadian Conference on Global Health, technical assistance programs on Mongolia, and women's, children's, and adolescent health projects in Tanzania. In addition, she has experience with projects in primary healthcare, medical education, health information systems, and communicable and non-communicable diseases in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Croatia, Ukraine, Tanzania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Serbia, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan. Next, I'll introduce Dr. Charles Palmer Larson, who is a physician with specializations in pediatrics and preventative medicine. So Charles is a board member of Pegasus Institute as well. He was a co-founder of the Point St. Charles Community Health Center, and he directed the McGill Ethiopia Strengthening Community Health Project as well. He was associate professor in the departments of pediatrics and epidemiology, biostatistics, and occupational health at McGill University. He headed the McGill Global Health Office and led a 5-year population child health project in Russia. In 2002, Dr. Larson directed the Health Systems and Infectious Disease Division at International Center for Diarrheal Diseases and Research in Bangladesh, and was a professor at the University of British Columbia, and related to the BC Children's Hospital Center and International Child Health. In 2015, he joined the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research, which is now CUGH. And he is now a national coordinator and is currently adjunct professor at McGill University and director of the Global Health Program. And we have Jan Hatcher-Roberts, who is an advisory board member on Pegasus's board. And she is the co-director of the WHO Collaborating Center on Technology Assessment, Knowledge Translation, and Health Equity at the University of Ottawa. She's an adjunct assistant professor at the Faculty of Medicine, School of Epidemiology and Public Health at the University of Ottawa. She was the executive director of the Canadian Society for International Health, with projects in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Central America, and Europe. And she was director of the Migration Health Department at the International Organization for Migration in Geneva. She was chair of the Board of Action Canada for Population Development, board member and past treasurer of the Canadian Coalition for Health Research, now CGH, and board member of US-based Council of Graduate Foreign Nurses. She was appointed OIC board member to Public Health Ontario and served for 4 years in the National Board to Make Poverty History. Currently, she is an advisory board member, as I said, of Pegasus Institute and elected board member of the Ottawa Center for Liberal Electoral District Association and regional representative for Eastern Ontario for the Federal Seniors Liberal Commission. And last but not least, we have Jacqueline Alger, who is a part-time faculty member at the of the research unit at the Unidad de Investigación Científica, which is UIC University in Honduras, in the Faculty of Medicine Sciences. This is a research unit, and she is a member of the World Health Organization Special Program for Research and Training in Tropical Diseases, Regional Training Center for Latin America and the Caribbean Network, managed by CIDEIM. She is also a parasitologist working in the Department of Clinical Laboratory at the University Hospital in Escuela. Jacqueline is one of the leads of Pegasus Institute's Latin American Network. She is a regional faculty of the Global Health Network program in Honduras and is country representative for the Healthcare Information for All. Okay, so that's an introduction to our amazingly wonderful panelists, and we'll move forward with the slides. So as we move forward with this panel, just a few questions to think about as the audience. So what are the principles of global health partnerships, particularly research and education? And what is the role of these principles for program implementation in projects? How do we encourage donors, think about national and international donors, to embrace these principles? What are the cultural challenges of collaboration between academia and non-government organization partnerships in Canada and with country partners? What are the pragmatic challenges of large donor-driven programs, expectations, outcomes, and impact? And just thinking a little bit about reciprocity and how we have mutually beneficial relationships. And I'll hand things over to Eva to start the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the lovely introduction and also thank Dorothy for the land acknowledgement. Personally, I am with the Canadian Association of Global Health, and our offices are based in Ottawa, Canada's capital, which is situated on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. So we are privileged to work on this land. So I am, as Melissa mentioned, the Canadian Association for Global Health is an NGO, and our mission is to bring the Canadian global health community together to achieve a shared global goal of improving health worldwide. We deliver a diverse program of activities in Canada and internationally across the global South with an emphasis on equitable partnerships. Our work involves knowledge translation, capacity strengthening, training, networking opportunities, collaboration, and partnerships, and that's in Canada and internationally. We're a new organization, but with a really long history. We are an amalgamation. We amalgamated officially last July. So about 8 months ago, and we're an amalgamation of the Canadian Society for International Health, which is a typical NGO with that had a very broad mandate in terms of capacity building, health system strengthening, convening the global health community. And we combined with the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research, which is an association, a network of academic institutions that really is interested in knowledge sharing around global health. So this is how we came to be. And this is where we are now. We are the CUGH. New logo, new acronym, old history, lots of knowledge and experience. Next slide, please. So as an NGO in Canada, we are really looking towards the government to be a partner to the government in implementing a lot of its global health policies and agendas. And of course, we also look to them for funding and as well as to our memberships. So there are three main policy agendas in Canada that NGOs look to. A big one is the Feminist International Assistance Policy developed by Global Affairs Canada. This is really the biggest source of funding for most Canadian NGOs. And its focus under the Feminist International Assistance Policy is to eradicate poverty and build a more peaceful, more inclusive, and more prosperous world. It promotes gender equality and really focuses on empowering women and girls, and really seeing this as the most effective approach to achieving the overall goal of poverty eradication and development. Another key strategy and resource for Canadian global health practitioners is the International Development Research Center. And the IDRC has a strategy, their strategy 2030, aligned with this SDGs, is to invest in high quality research and innovation, focus on sharing knowledge and mobilizing global alliances to support more sustainable and inclusive societies in the developing world. Within global health specifically, IDRC looks to strengthen health systems and policies so they can deliver better maternal and child health, improved sexual and reproductive health and rights for women and girls, and more equitable and effective preparedness and response to epidemics. Another key institution in Canada is the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And this seeks to foster effective Canadian involvement in international health research that benefits the Canadians and the global community. This is a really important institute in terms of funding research, not just in global health, but health research altogether. And the CIHR has recently developed its framework for action on global health research. And this, again, is really a key document for us, for the researchers in our community, in our global health community in Canada. And what we're excited about is that the CIHR formally adopted the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Researchers principles for health research and the principles framework as a best practice in conducting global health research. And I'm not going to speak more about that because I know Charles is going to be covering that in the presentation. But this is a really important approach to and a uniquely Canadian approach, I think, to how we engage in partnerships with the global health community. In terms of content and the thematic priorities, the Canadian priorities for global health really are guided by the feminist agenda that's really well outlined in the Feminist International Assistance Policy developed by Global Affairs Canada. And for the non-Canadians in the audience, I guess that would be the equivalent of the USAID programming. Okay. SRHR is really spotlighted, not just in the Feminist International Assistance Policy, but in the other global policy agendas. And this is sexual reproductive health and rights. And as many of you know, like there was a time not too long ago that there was a bit of a reversal in trends in support for SRHR. From some American policies, and Canada really stepped up to try to safeguard that progress in global health and in the development agenda. Indigenous health is a big priority for global health, and it's challenging because we talk about Indigenous health within the Canadian, within Canada's context, but there's so many disparities and inequities within the Indigenous communities and with Canadian populations, other parts of Canada, that there is something very global, like there's a strong alignment with the global health principles and global health approaches when we talk about Indigenous health, even within our own country. So it's something that we really need to be mindful of, and how Indigenous health fits with global health. Equity, diversity, and inclusion, you'll see that everywhere. It's something that, like, we're not only talking about gender equity, but we're talking about equity in all its spheres, whether it's in terms of disability and ability, in terms of inclusion in society, and so forth, diversity, racial, ethnic, any sexual diversity, all of that. That's big on the agenda, and it is really something that you cannot do work without global health work without considering these issues very thoughtfully. Decolonizing global health is really important as well for us when we look at how we work. We've moved away from the model of tropical medicine, like we've gone past international health, and now we're looking at global health. And you can't do that without talking about decolonization. And decolonizing global health, we have this is an issue within Canada, and it's an issue in how we engage with our global partners. So, so we are looking to move away from the missionary models and the providing assistance, and really looking at how we can deliver global health in an equitable way that is very that seeks to redress a lot of the wrongs that came by through colonization. Canada, like the rest of the world, we've been hit with the COVID pandemic. It's affected all aspects of our lives, our work, the sector, and we are looking at. We're still in the pandemic. It's changing the form. It's morphing, but this is something that that is high on our agenda. And the building back better approaches, looking at how we can pandemic preparedness for the future. That is also really key in moving forward. And then, despite the sudden onset of the pandemic and all the rapid changes that brought about, we can't be negligent of climate change. Huge on the agenda, the global health. It's huge on the agenda overall, but also huge on the climate change agenda, on the global health agenda. And we see this a lot with communities being affected directly by immediate impacts of climate change. We see this in the northern communities where there are more susceptibility to some of the warming that's taking effect, and also it really highlights a lot of the inequities that exist. And so looking at how we mitigate for climate change is big as well. Next slide, please. So all of these priority issues and these great challenges that we face, we can't do these things alone. Partnership is more important than ever, and we work in partnership. I would say that we do most of our work is not done alone. We are working in partnerships, and CUGH has been working in partnership with all kinds of organizations and in different modalities. And I'm just going to mention a little bit of the kinds of partnerships that we've worked in over the years. Huge is research and practice. CUGH has always been the convening platform for bringing researchers and practitioners and policymakers together, largely through our annual conference on global health. But as of last year, we formalized this relationship through the amalgamation of the CCGHR and the Canadian Society for International Health. And the establishment of CUGH is really an excellent example of partnership between researchers and practitioners. We often need to look at what results need to be achieved and look at what needs to be done to achieve those results. And where we don't have the competencies or the skills ourselves, we look to partner with others. And a lot of an example of some of the work that we've done that in terms of establishing a consortium for a project, we had two such consortia in Tanzania that just wrapped up, And these were interesting that they involved the Enrich project, or for example, we work with World Vision Canada, World Vision Tanzania, CSIH, the predecessor of CUGH, and the University of Toronto, all together to achieve results in maternal and child nutrition and health. And it was great that we had the communities in place that had all the community mobilization activities. CSIH brought to the table the skills in health system strengthening, capacity strengthening for sustainability. And the universities provided their expertise in looking at the research and looking at establishing proper methodologies for doing practical research on this. We also work directly with partners in low and middle income countries. And this, given the nature of our work as doing health system strengthening, our partners tend to be government partners. And so under World Bank or Asian Development Bank projects in Mongolia, Asian Development Bank in Mongolia or World Bank in Kazakhstan, our direct partners were the respective ministries of health, and they would work with the funding from the banks, but our engagement was directly with the ministries of health and their operations. And a lot of in these countries, the health system is directly funded through the Ministry of Health. So we would work directly with these Lmic partners. Formal arrangements would obviously need to be made, but also like different partnership type of relationships. And then of course there's community engagement on global health priorities. And so we do this there. We conduct dialogues, we convene the conference, we look for partners on this from different levels of the community, different areas of expertise, not only health, but looking across different sectors and looking at how we can engage all together. So these are just some of the examples of how we've worked collaboratively and in partnership and to achieve different outcomes and with different modalities of engagement. Next slide, please. So it's not always easy, and I'm going to just flag a couple of the challenges to equitable partnerships. And I really want to point out the word equitable partnerships, because partnerships can be, we can claim partnerships can all be effective and they can reach results, but we want to ensure that these are done in an equitable way. And there are some challenges that exist that I just want to flag, and I'm sure that they're not unique to Canada, but some of them may be. So of course, there's the cultural challenges, and working in global health, we often think of cultural challenges as being like working with different countries. But I've got to tell you, there are challenges. The culture of academia and research can be very different from that of NGOs or civil society organizations. So when we're looking at balancing evidence and action and really looking at how do we make this an equitable relationship, we do need to consider that academics can be more can think more in depth. The research can be more rigorous in terms of methodology and consideration. There's a lot more back end work and evidence and not just evidence, but just a lot more academic research and methodology is involved. NGOs and CSOs tend to be very agile and quick to respond. Our timelines can be different. Like when we're looking to achieve results, we are often driven by the donor or funder, and the timelines tend to be out of our hands somewhat. And we may not have 2 years to develop a full research methodology and so forth. So that's one of the challenges. Alignment of Canadian and LMIC agendas and priorities. I talked a little bit about that with the Canada's priorities around SRHR, gender equality, the feminist agenda. That may not always be the top of the priority list for a lot of our partners. The donor and client requirements as well may not always align neatly with the beneficiaries' needs. We have the reporting requirements, we have the timelines, we have the funding cycles and so forth, the work plan development with strict milestones may not always align with the beneficiaries or partners' needs and absorptive capacity, or their own priorities, especially when they're juggling work with multiple donors or their own governments and so forth. So that's a big challenge as well. And then one that might be more Canadian than some others is the local ownership versus accountability. And this is best articulated in the consideration of the Canadian Revenue Agency has established some principles for direction and control for when Canadians work with partners outside of Canada. And that's really looking at risk management, political risk management, and it does, whereas we look to empower our partners in the global south with as much ownership and stake in projects as possible. The Canada Revenue Agency's guidelines for direction and control really require that the Canadian partner be the lead on things like funding, like holding the funds, accounting for the funds, monitoring progress, and so forth. And so that really can be a little bit disempowering for the local partners because we have to adhere to these rules. So this gives you, I think, I'm out of time now already, but I think this gives you a good snapshot of what Canadian priorities, partnerships, and some of the practical issues are on our side when engaging in global health. So thank you for your time, and over to Charles.
Thank you, Eva, and hello to everyone. Greatly appreciate your attendance today for this symposium. I'm just going to take the next few minutes to briefly describe a series of studies that the Canadian Coalition for Global Health Research, now CUGH, have conducted to better understand and guide the inception and implementation of equitable global health partnerships. And as you can see here, I'm going to be discussing three: the partnership assessment tool, the principles for global health research, and the equity tool for evaluation of global health partnerships. So let me start with the partnership assessment tool. The partnership assessment tool is the result of a project conducted in partnership with low and middle income country organizations in Ecuador, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia. The project was developed in response to observations that the majority of what has been written on best practices for North-South partnerships have been actually developed in the North. This project had 3 regional consultations in South Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and each sought to elicit the Southern voice on health research partnerships and to generate substantive tools for significantly improving the way in which these partnerships are conducted. The intent is to assist research teams in equitably generating consensus around sustainability, knowledge generation, knowledge translation, capacity development, and innovation. From these consultations and dialogues, the overwhelming evidence from the consultations is that there was a need for much improvement in the conduct of health research partnerships. Southern partners indicated there's a need to negotiate for equity in partnerships as essential, and that principles and norms are needed on which to base these negotiations. It was also clear that a mechanism was required to guide these negotiations, as well as monitoring and evaluation across the lifespan of a partnership. This led to the development of a toolkit made up of a series of questions and exercises that through subsequent discussion better equips parties entering into health research partnerships with the means of assessing their partnership through 4 stages. Their inception, implementation, dissemination, and good innings and new beginnings. The questions represent different topics that should be discussed, agreed upon, and where possible, formalized between partners across the lifespan of the partnership. Can I have the next slide, please? The second study I want to describe is titled The Principles for Global Health Research, which I expect many of you are well aware of. This built upon the partnership assessment tool, as well as the Canadian Tri-Council policy statement on ethical conduct of research involving humans. It also built on a lot of lessons learned from working with Canadian Indigenous communities. The principles were developed through a multi-stage dialogue-based process. The study was launched in 2013 in response to a call for action from researchers, from funders, administrators, who all indicated a need for greater clarity regarding what equitable global health research actually encompasses. Or put another way, what principles do define global health research partnerships. Dialogues were held in 6 provinces across Canada with over 300 participants, with fairly even distribution among researchers, students, NGOs, government agencies, and consultants. Each dialogue included individuals also from low and middle income countries. In the end, 6 principles, as you can see here on the illustration, to guide global health research were identified. Each principle is accompanied by a brief description and an example of how it might be enacted briefly. These, as you can see, include authentic partnering, inclusion, shared benefits, commitment to the future, responsiveness to causes of inequity, and humility. And for any of you who want to learn more about this in the earlier partnership assessment tool, you can find detailed guidelines of each on the Canadian Association for Global Health website. The principles are meant to complement each other, working collectively to inform any approach to global health research. It's not meant to be prescriptive, and they offer a set of practical tools with examples to inform practice, spark dialogue, and inspire reflection. Notably, in the spring, as you just heard in 2021, the Canadian Institutes for Global Health adopted the principles for their global health research as a best practice in conducting global health research. And they are currently implementing mechanisms to ensure that they are followed by researchers where relevant and appropriate. I should mention that for those of you who don't know, CIHR is pretty much the equivalent of the US NIH. The next slide. The third study I want to describe to you is titled The Equity Tool for the Evaluation of Global Health Partnerships, or EQT. Once again, it builds on the partnership assessment tool and the principles document. It's an equity-focused tool meant to guide global health partnerships, whether engaged in this instance, not just research. It was meant also for practitioners, for those who are involved with building capacity or development. It's meant to be user-friendly and easily carried out over a modest period of time. The global health partnerships that consider issues of equity in their processes and structures hold greater potential, we feel, for lasting health impact and building local capacity. Yet, how equity is embedded and nurtured throughout a partnership has remained a constant challenge. Our literature review identified several partnership evaluation tools that do attempt to construct a meaningful guide on what makes a global health partnership successful. These are pretty varied and context specific, but I think uniformly across all of them, there was not a clear consideration of issues of equity, and therefore the need we felt to develop this tool. So with this in mind, and with a Global Affairs Canada grant, in partnership with McGill University, Université de Laval, University of British Columbia, an NGO, HealthBridge, and partners in Burkina Faso and Vietnam, we set out to develop this tool for valuing a global health partnership throughout its lifespan using an equity lens. The development of the UQT was informed by a scoping review of the literature, an online survey and follow-up telephone interviews, workshops held in French and English here in Canada and in Burkina Faso and Vietnam. Also a critical interpretive synthesis of the articles that we identified and a content validation exercise. Guided by the equity-centered principles, data showing specific and promising ways to practice equity were then themed under these 4 domains: governance and process, procedures and operations, progress and impacts, and power and inclusion. From each of these promising ways to put practices into action, a set of statements within each domain of practice were derived, each intended to illuminate how people engaged in global health projects feel about the ways in which equity is functionally working and experienced by themselves as an individual, but also in the partnership overall. The primary intent of the EQT is to support dialogue that enables people involved in partnering to reflect on their own experiences and identify how equity is reflected in partnering practices and processes. There's no score, nor is it intended to conclude a partnership is equitable or there's not equitable. The tool will spark questions that allow people to pause and think about their experiences of partnering. Partnerships will find it useful to use the tool to guide dialogue from the earliest phases of partnering. And it is we very much hope and anticipate the use of the tool and pausing to reflect on equity and considerations will support more equitable engagement in future partnerships. And as I said, each of these tools will be available on the CAGH website, and we encourage you to use them and provide us feedback on your experiences with them. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Janet.
Thanks, Charles. I live up the street from Eva, so I am honored to be speaking with you on Algonquin Anishinaabe, unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory as well. We wanted to talk a bit more about if we're going to achieve equitable partnerships, there are expectations that the results will be equitable as well. And so producing those equitable impacts are almost as critical as creating those equitable partnerships, because without both, it won't be a sustainable way forward. Next slide. So who are we? Well, we're a group of people, of networks. I'm at the Briere Research Institute Center for Equity Effectiveness, and I co-direct the WHO Collaborating Center for Knowledge Translation Technology Assessment for Health Equity with Dr. Peter Tugwell. Next slide. So why do we talk about equity, and why does it seem to be a focus for us here in Canada, maybe more so than other countries? Well, equity is, as many of you know, is a foundation of Canada's social safety web. It's part of our vision for health and well-being. We have a universal healthcare coverage, and it's perhaps why we've taken this concept on and realized it in our work around implementation. How do we make sure that what we implement has an equitable impact? How do we equip researchers and policymakers with tools to realize equity and equitable impacts? Communities understand concepts of equity, no problem, equity and fairness, and they want to ensure it happens at all levels. So how do we make sure that happens? Next slide. So we want to ensure equitable outcomes, not just in research findings, but also with interventions with communities and our government priorities, but also policies. Are these policies going to have an equitable impact? Next slide. So fairness is about is a distributional concept. Equity is a distributional concept. It's about being fair. It's not always about being equal. Next slide. So we have supported equity over the last 20 years as part of the Cochrane Evidence Reviews through Peter Tugwell and Vivian Welsh, and created networks of like-minded researchers, consumers, and decision makers. We've also supported equity as part of the Campbell Reviews. Vivian Welsh, Brown, and Petkovich have created networks of like-minded researchers, decision makers, and consumers. I might add also Tim Evans was part of some of that work as well, a Canadian now at McGill. Vivian Welsh at our WHO Collaborating Center and BRI is acting CEO of the Campbell Coordination and editor of the Campbell Journal. So of great influence in terms of bringing equity to the work we do. And we've also sought to influence and build capacity with our global colleagues. Next slide. So in reality, should we be concerned about evidence that's at the mean, or should we be looking at the tails of the curve? And where we concentrate our thinking and influence and cajoling is around the tails of the curve. Traditionally, you look at the evidence around the mean and say, oh, this works, okay, let's move it out. But we're working often with the most vulnerable populations. And if it doesn't work there, why is it not working? Who are these vulnerable populations? Why aren't they part of the of what we think would be the impact? Next slide. So this is what we call the staircase effect of equity effectiveness. We often see a very successful result in the research world, an efficacy of, let's say, 86%. But as we move and roll this out in the real life situation, we often have issues around accessing that intervention, around diagnostic accuracy. Do we have the technology? Do we have the chain, a cold chain? Do we have transportation of the lab tests? Is there provider compliance? Do the people that are delivering it, have they been trained? Are they aware of it? Do they want to implement this? Is there some kind of pushback? And then there's community adherence. Is the consumer keen about taking this on? Do they want to take this pill? Do they want to be part of this intervention? Do they trust this intervention? Are they leery about it? Do they feel that it might make them more sick than not taking it? And so this can often move, therefore, from an efficacy of 86% to community effectiveness of around 12%. And there's been some software that's been developed that allow you to take a look at each of these steps for any kind of intervention and start to assess where you're at and where you need to really focus your attention to reduce the inequities that may create this reduced community effectiveness. Next slide. So in order to understand what may affect our ability to deliver an equitable outcome or result, we need to think about what are the characteristics that might contribute to making a person or a population vulnerable to health inequities. Next slide. And from that, we developed a tool that implements this equity lens that Charles was talking about, but looking at interventions by ensuring that when we look at every intervention, we take a look at all of these aspects that are often called social determinants of health as well. Next slide. And then was further developed through what we call Progress Plus by looking at drilling down in terms of personal characteristics, features of the relationship, and time-dependent relationships. So this allows us to systematically look at interventions and say, are they really, do they have an equity lens? And will the impact of this be equitable? Next slide. So then, while this wasn't necessarily developed by us and it was developed globally, we're really using this in Canada, in particular some of the provinces, to look at policy tools. Is this policy going to have an equitable impact? And this health equity impact assessment workbook and tool is very useful if you want to assess a policy or at a program level rather than an intervention. Next slide. And I won't go into the details, but it's a nice little grid that allows you to go through all the different aspects by the different steps, and takes you right through the cycle of assessment for health equity impact assessment. Next slide. So the take-home messages: partnerships can be equitable. There are challenges and there are tools to support this, as Charles and Eva have said. Not only research partnerships, but implementation and technical assistance partnerships. But we also need to encourage approaches that bring equitable results and outcomes from these partnerships through strengthened networks and collaboration. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to continue now, and I have seen how Eva, Charles, and Janet have shared with us different principles, tools, experiences, approaches that they have carried out for equitable partnerships within their institutions and within their context in Canada, and working with a number of global partners. I have not worked directly for a long time with Canadian partners, but I do have some examples. I more recently have started working with the Pegasus Institute, for which I'm thankful, and I thanks for this opportunity to be with you today and share some of my experience. So I have these two examples. One example that I want to share with you is the project Redes. Redes is a word in Spanish that is networks. So this project Redes was a project for strengthening networks for community. This was a Canadian Red Cross collaboration with the Honduran Red Cross. And they had the Canadian International Development Agency funding. And this project was carried out in the period of 2006 and 2012 in Honduras, in rural areas of Honduras. I got to know this project at the end of the project in 2012, because they wanted to share the results in a scientific meeting, and for that they approached the National University of Honduras, and they got to present their results and their methodologies within that scientific event. And as a matter of fact, Neil Aria visited us in 2016 for that event. Okay, this project was different levels of communities. So there was the people in the very rural communities. There were organized groups within those communities. There were also the authorities, the local authorities, and then the regional authorities, and then there were the counterparts, the Red Cross, different levels, and the Canadian and the Honduran Red Cross, different levels of organization, and working with the people. I know that their outcomes were well taken, and that the people was very pleased. And from what I learned from that interchange, they really work very closely to the people in a day-by-day basis. The other example that I wanted to share with you is a eco-health approach for chagas, disease prevention in Central America. This was an IDRC funded project. The funding was for an institution in Guatemala, the Asociación para Investigación y Estudios Sociales in Guatemala, and they partnered with Honduras and with El Salvador. And so they were mobilizing community participation. They were mobilizing for house improvement. And then by doing this improvement of the houses, they were reducing the vectorial transmission of chagas disease. And also they got to improve all their health outcomes just by improving their home and their close environments in those very rural areas of the 3 countries. And I understand also that the collaboration was different levels from the communities, the rural people living in the communities, and then the health authorities, local health authorities, and then regional authorities, and then the investigators. I was related to that because the institution in Honduras, I was not the research team, but I was part of the administration of Instituto Antonio Vidal that was taking care of that. Okay, then from these 2 examples, I want to share that the partnership is multi-layered. So it's many different layers. So there is one layer that is at the surface and could be from country to country. But then within the country, there are multiple layers. And for that reason, that could be the reason that the effectiveness sometimes goes down, because by the last layer, there are many contextual factors. So there are other barriers like the language, the culture, as was mentioned before. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic, we have learned with the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to take into account a lot, learned some technology that we didn't use much before. So that's a good thing from the pandemic, because in the partnerships, you have to take into account that we in countries like Honduras with low resource settings, we have less technology. And just, I know that my time is running out, but then we have some frameworks. And I would like just to mention that we have the CUGH framework for equitable partnerships and for research in low resource settings. We also have the 2030 agenda that had been mentioned before, and the SDGs. And we also have implementation research, which take into account all of these contextual issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if you want to type a question in the chat. Did anyone have any specific questions? Someone asked, are the equitable tools available online or other sources? So Eva mentioned that some of these sources are on the CUGH website as well, so if people would like to know. And will the slide sets be available? Yes, we can definitely pass that on to people as long as we have a way to access the email list, which I'm sure we do. So we can send these along as well, because they could be useful to many. All right, and if there are no further questions, I think we'll wrap up this panel. I'd like to thank everybody in this panel, including Eva, Charles, Jan, and Jacqueline. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and on partnerships and how equitable partnerships and how we do things in the Canadian context. And I'm sure there are probably a number of who will want to get in touch with you afterwards. So I can help link with that. I did share my email in the chat there. So thank you all, and I'll turn it to Neil to start with our second panel.
Great. So thank you all, sir. I was going to just stand up. I think that some of us might want to stretch very quickly. I know you can shut off your screen and tune out if you want as things start. I'm really excited to introduce our second panel. But before we do that, I'd just like to see if Theodora wants to unmute and just tell us a little bit about CUGH, because not everybody who signed up for this is registered for the main conference. So if she wants to talk about this and the main conference for a couple of minutes, you're welcome to do that, Theodora. Or did she sign off? Okay. Yeah, she may have gone then. So our second panel, then I would like to see if we can get Claire and Jill, and I think Alice already has her video on. So our second panel is with three women. You may see in terms of gender parity, we might not achieve this fully with our panels, but we have distinguished leaders, and in Canada, we're actually blessed with, I think, having a majority of global health leaders are women. So I'll just try to tell you a little bit about each of our people. So just we'll begin. I'll do a short presentation just about neocolonialism, and then Claire Payne will be speaking next. Claire is currently in Addis, but about to come back to Canada after a few months in Ethiopia. Claire is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto, the director of the Psychological Trauma Program at Mount Sinai Hospital, and in 2003, became the co-project director of the Toronto Addis Ababa Psychiatry Project through the Department of Psychiatry at U of T, which worked on building capacity and sustainability with the first residency program in psychiatry in Ethiopia. And 5 years later, Addis negotiated with U of T to develop a more broader collaboration that Claire will talk about. And it is now growing with over 14 individual partnerships in 6 faculties. And volunteer faculties go to Addis to teach. So Claire will share lessons from that. And then we will have a couple of respondents. Alice Nube, medical anthropologist by training, now with Western University, with a keen interest, as she says, in the challenges of decolonizing global health. She's led various research related to perceptions and moral experiences of clinical trials during the West African Ebola epidemic 7 years ago. Research, consent, and compensation practices in low-income countries, palliative care in disaster and public health emergencies, drones and tuberculosis diagnostics and treatment in Madagascar, short-term medical admissions in Central America, and end-of-life care in Canadian hospitals, among other things. And so Elise will be partly responding to Claire's presentation, but also going on beyond that. And our second respondent will be Jill Allison, who recently retired as Global Health Coordinator and Director of the Global Health Office at Memorial University of Newfoundland. Jill has a PhD and in anthropology and has been building health equity for the past 40 years. She works in the areas of access to women's health and sexual and reproductive health. And she's worked on projects in rural Haiti, rural Nepal, and did her PhD work on infertility in Ireland. Her work in social science has been informed by years in a nursing career that included such global health projects in Nepal and Bangladesh. And she's also been involved in local ventures. So we're very lucky to have the expertise of all three of our speakers. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'll just let you know about the questions that we have, and then I'll go through a presentation myself. So these are more reflective questions, and our speakers, you might see some answers to some of these, and you might want to ask some of these yourself, but so they're going to talk about how we develop and share opportunities, build local capacity, strengthen systems, and train for equity, hopefully highlighting some best practices, and how our practice reflects decolonization and encourages South-South and South-North engagement, how we can encourage two-way mentorship throughout life cycles of programming, what has driven each of our panelists' engagement with underserved, marginalized, or vulnerable populations, so practical, personal, and ethical motivations, and how engagement may have succeeded or may have fallen short. So this is meant to think critically about things, and we hope that during this time, you reflect yourself on what resonates with you, on what you've heard, and what may not, and what conditions, ideas, structural processes, norms of research feed tokenistic engagement, and what needs to happen in teaching, research, or practice for this to change. So not simple questions, but we're hoping that we can all reflect on these particular issues. Yeah, so I think what I will do is I will share some things here. And are you able to see my screen? I think I will now do this as a slideshow. Is this working okay?
Yeah, it's loading.
Okay, good. So yeah, welcome to all of our speakers. And it's really nice to see just in the chat where some of you are from, and you may want to introduce yourselves again, and there may be avenues of collaboration with Pegasus, CUGH, and some of our other partners here. So we hope that that takes place. It is really loading slowly, isn't it? So if that doesn't load much more quickly, then we'll move back to our original sharing process. The first slide, if I to try to make sure that we don't fall too far behind. So the first slide refers to what colonialism is. Okay, I think I'm going to stop the sharing. Maybe you can restart sharing. Okay, good. So we'll go through this again, and I'll try to sort this out between the second and third presentation. Or maybe this is a particular issue right now with the platform or with Google, do you think?
Maybe if we both stop, and then Neil, if you want to give it a try, maybe some kind of crossed wires when we both try to share.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that what we'll have the same problem as sharing the things for Claire, so we have to give it a little bit of time anyway. Should I try again? I think, Camille?
Yeah, maybe give it a try.
Okay, we will try once again, see whether something, participants can now see the application. while we're trying to get this sorted out, did any of our three panelists want to make any introductory remarks?
I'm just happy to be here, and I'd like to just reiterate what you have stated, Neil, which is that we are really seeing this as following yourself and Claire making a few anchoring remarks. We're going to see this more as a dialogue. So really looking forward to people's thoughts on the limitations, the possibilities, and what's needed to truly decolonize, which of course gets to the question of what decolonization is. And we expect that different people will have different concerns. So really looking forward to, we all met on Saturday as panelists and with yourself, Neil, and we were just really looking forward to learning from the audience. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder with our tech person if there is something that seems like it's not working. Kevin, do you think that that there's something that we should be doing?
Neil, it looks like all the slides are up in one big conglomerate. Can
Oh,
you,
it is. Okay. Well, let's just see if it
can you
starts.
just maybe click on those and see if that works?
Okay, I will do that again. So you're able to see this screen now with all the slides?
I can see like about 5,000 slides. So if you go down, you might find where your slides start. There's your picture.
Yeah.
Now go there.
Yeah.
There.
Are you able to see now?
Yeah. Colonialism.
Okay. Well, why don't we do it just at that? Maybe the slideshow part is not working. So I'll do it just showing this without slideshow. Okay. So just because we're going to talk about decolonization, I wanted to talk about colonialism and colonization. And colonialism, according to Google, is the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. That's also pretty similar to the Oxford definition. I recall when I was in high school, one of my professors talking about the reason that people went across to the new world, supposedly. And of course, I'm of Indian origin, from the old world, and but a different old world. And the 3 G's were the reason: God, gold, and glory. And that stuck with me throughout, and in terms of any type of international engagement, why we are going overseas. And at different times I've gone back to question myself about different engagement. This, of course, by Rudyard Kipling is well known, The White Man's Burden. And if you haven't read this poem, you should read that. I did an engineering degree before medicine, and Kipling actually has this ritual, the calling of an engineer. And so he starts this off with, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need." And this ends up with, "Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace, fill full the mouths of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, an end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught." So this really represented what I saw as supposedly the benevolent engagement of people, not the exploiting gold type of thing, but this white man's burden to help those in the South. And of course, being of Indian origin, and with my father being very much anti-colonialist and having suffered in the partition of India, I never, this of course never resonated with me, but there are many ways in which we, even those of us who come from those backgrounds, adopt these things. And Edward Said certainly brought this to a lot of people's consciousness in Orientalism. And there are the Westerners and there are Orientals. The former dominate and the latter must be dominated, which usually means having their land occupied, their internal affairs rigidly controlled, their blood and treasure put at the disposal of one or another Western power. And Said was speaking as a Palestinian. Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana actually talked about neocolonialism and the ways in which once colonization ended, that there are many ways in which those with power, particularly in the global north, continue practices in different ways. Neocolonialism being the geopolitical practice of using capitalism, business globalization, and cultural imperialism to influence a country, opening their economy to transnational corporations and facilitating the cultural assimilation of colonized people. And so as we think of global health engagement, we might want to think how we are doing this or how we're doing the opposite. And I think that as you hear from Claire and the other speakers, you'll see that. This is something that I've used in my global health teaching. A short speech by Ivan Illich. Illich was a priest in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and accepted US volunteers. And he was asked to speak in 1968 at a conference in Chicago. And he basically spent the entire speech talking about why people shouldn't go. And I just can't imagine being a young American ready to go down and start your world, to start your career and going to help supposedly to hear this speech. But it was very necessary and it's very useful for when we talk to our students. So Illich, among other quotes from the speech, says, "Next to money and guns, the third largest North American export is a US idealist who turns up in every theater of the world. The teacher, the volunteer, the missionary, the community organizer, the economic developer, and the vacationing do-gooders." He says later, "You start your task without any training. Even the Peace Corps spends around $10,000 on each Corps member to help him adapt to his new environment and to guard him against cultural shock. How odd that nobody ever thought about spending the money to educate poor Mexicans in order to prevent them from the culture shock of meeting you. In fact, you cannot even pretend to meet the majority which you pretend to serve in Latin America, even if you speak their language, which most of you cannot. All you will do in a Mexican village is create disorder. At best, you can try to convince Mexican girls that they should marry a young man who is self-made, rich, a consumer, and as disrespectful a tradition as one of you. At worst is your community development spirit. You might create just enough problems to get someone shot after your vacation ends, and you rush back to your middle-class neighborhoods where your friends make jokes about spits and wetbacks. And if we think that we've really changed so much, I don't know if any of you have seen some of these things on social media. So humanitarians of Tinder, again, just looking at what people have on their social media profile, an interesting website. And then there's another site about Barbie Savior, about the doll who saved Africa. These images that we often have. Louise Linton, who was married to the US, or is married to the US Secretary of Treasury under Donald Trump, actually wrote about one girl's perilous journey to the heart of Africa, time that she spent in the Congo. So very much things may not have changed as much as we would like. Now, I'm not sure, since I'm not going to be doing it as a slideshow, how this will show, but back when I finished medical school, I recall seeing this movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. I don't know if any of you saw this. This was made by a South African filmmaker. I'm going to see if this shows, or actually this is, oh, this must have been when I started university, so it's 1980. So no, this is well before I finished medical school. So I hope that this shows. Okay. So that's not showing. I'll try this one here. Okay, I think that in the name of time, we want to get going and see Claire's presentation and have more audience interaction. These things I'll try to show maybe during the break if we have a break at the end. Basically representing some of these things about what I would see as neocolonialism. When you see this film, which was very popular in North America, it was actually seen as a progressive representation of the idealized Bantu person living off the land. But I think that 30 years later, it may not have aged well. I don't think it really was that great to begin with, but other people did not see this coming from the South African filmmaker as representing a form of colonialism. The second set here that I had was on Joseph Kony and the whole thing about how we North Americans were going to rescue Africans from Joseph Kony. And so if I have a chance, I'll show that. It looks like this may show.
Hi, I'm just calling. I'm looking for some more information on helping or aiding the local youths of North America. I really heard that obesity was this huge problem over there, so I'm thinking about like teaching them Zumba for a couple weeks, you know, like really make a difference. Oh, CrossFit. Yeah, maybe I'll teach them CrossFit. $5,000? Yeah, I've got $5,000. Lemonade! I only need $5,000 to fix America. Anything to aid the youths of North America. It's just $5,000 for a 2-week trip, but the change is priceless. It's just like, you know, be the change. You know who said that? Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah, knowledge bomb. Look at all the local children just playing around. Hi, children. Lemonade? Oh, come on, you too good for the first world? Be the change, brah. Gandhi said that. Children, come on. Gather around. It's time for a selfie. I even got on this optional excursion that's going to like let me go into Walmarts and like I'm actually going to interact with real North Americans. Yeah, it's so sick, buds. Excuse me, can you take a photo of me with these local youths? Sorry, what are you doing here? I'm building a school.
Okay. So anyway, that is meant to introduce us to the panel. So I will let Claire take this over then. So thank you all for this introduction.
Thanks, Neil. That was a perfect intro, I hope, to TAC. I want to be quite brief about, I've got a lot of slides and hopefully lots of images that will take very little time to show you, but give you an idea. But because the two other panelists and we'd love want to talk and we'd love to hear from you. So University of Toronto and Addis Ababa University started nearly 20 years ago next year, with a partnership between the departments of psychiatry in both universities. At the time, the University of Toronto had 700 faculty and Addis Ababa University had 2.5 faculty in psychiatry and about 8 psychiatrists in the country. And our agreement was we would assist them, the department, build their first psychiatry residency program in Ethiopia. And we kind of stumbled into a model, and the model became the desired partnership model between Addis Ababa University and other Western universities, and they actually changed their curriculum because we would bring 2 faculty and a resident for 1 month, 3 times a year. So it was this kind of bolus approach. The kind of little curriculums that we brought had been pre-negotiated with the faculty and psychiatrists in Ethiopia. And then the 2 faculty and a resident would come for a month of teaching, much of which was supervision, because with such a teeny faculty and a very quickly growing residency program, the problem is nobody gets to observe residents' work. So that was enormous fun and very helpful, hopefully to both sides. As Neil so kindly said in 2010, the whole project increased because Addis Ababa University invited University of Toronto to sort of continue on the same or similar kind of model into as many graduate programs as we could. So we have 26 firsts. We have 26 programs kind of based on that first psychiatry model. And they were all firsts because although they had a healthy residency program, they didn't have many of the subspecialties like hematology, endocrinology, at the time, psychiatry, family medicine, emergency medicine. So we've had this TAC, the Toronto Addis Ababa academic collaboration, has involved working with each of those 27 programs to help assist develop the program that's required, the residency program that's required. Our goals, our mutually agreed upon goals, are to help. Addis Ababa University is a sort of feeder university. It's the biggest one with the most established graduate programs. So the idea is, as new graduates of each programs qualify, they take up teaching positions at Addis Ababa University, and then over the 50 other new universities, or there are 50 universities in Ethiopia, about 45 of which are pretty new in the last 10 years. So it's a kind of a feeder approach to building sustainability in graduate programs. Next slide, please. This is just a quick look at old Sam on the right, young Sam on the left, and our resident in the middle. And this was one of the first Ethiopian, first teaching groups to the residency program there. Next slide, please. Our guidelines, as I say, it's been, from my point of view, the most wonderful kind of process of working together to develop a model. We didn't have any of the things you're supposed to have when we started, except kind of goodwill and an excitement about collaborating. But over the years, we've tried to distill some of the things that we think are important. And I think some of the things said in panel 1 were helpful as I reflected on them. But number 1, the curriculum is owned and overseen by our Ethiopian colleagues. We don't bring in anything that hasn't been pre-organized and that's compatible with their own established curriculums. So we don't make curriculums for anybody. We will just teach into what's needed as pre-negotiated, but hopefully in a fairly organized way. We go out, we send ahead of time a really clear, hopefully well-presented academic curriculum with objectives, etc. We have developed some guidelines for what we believe is an essential component when we do write articles together or do research, which is not the aim of the program. The program is to fulfill the Ethiopians' request, which is to develop capacity and sustainability in graduate programs in the country, and retain young professionals in all the areas that we work in. But we do believe very much, unlike actually the rules of journal writing at the moment, we do believe that there must be equal numbers of Ethiopians to non-Ethiopians on the authorship. And we also believe that unlike the rules of authorship, some jobs, some components of the research or work are not recognized otherwise, but like running a clinic where people trust the person in charge and who can then recruit patients or can manage those kind of practical things, we regard as trying to recognize that what goes into writing an academic paper is more than just being able to write. We think of ourselves as invited guests. We're sort of invited into the front room of somebody's house, and it's not our job to go looking under the pots in the kitchen or tweaking the plumbing in the bathroom. We are beautifully hosted and wonderfully looked after and appreciated, but we are careful to try and maintain a hands-off kind of approach. We're there because we're invited guests. And we try very hard. And it's a bit like marriage, you know, you're never quite sure what's going on. You know, 50%, but never 100%. And you make mistakes and you apologize and you learn and you laugh. At least that's what we hope happens. And we try mutually to be reflective about the purposes and effects, both positive and unintended. It helps the longer we've been having the partnership. Although new partners come in, it does help to have a sort of a way of doing things. Next slide, please. These are very quick, and I know the panel is going to talk about this. Although Ethiopia has never been colonized, the only African country really not to have been colonized, it was occupied from 35 to 41 by the Italians. But colonization, I think, is more subtle than that. For instance, as an example, the DSM-5 is the kind of recipe book of psychiatry in Canada. And one of the things about colonialism is assuming there's nothing there, right? And we great colonists go and give Ethiopia the DSM-5 as a way of thinking about mental illness, which is cringeworthy, really, given that they have a vast and organized way of understanding psychological distress within a well-established holy waters and traditional mental health kind of setup. Next slide, please. My quality or yours is, do we bring in Westernization as sort of disguised as better teaching? Can I do it? Oh, I don't think I can. Next, thank you. So we're guided by the sort of, this is now actually a tiny bit old, but the Lancet came out with the health professionals for a new century, transforming education to strengthen health systems in an interdependent world. Next slide. So I think we try and work with our Ethiopian colleagues who are already there, kind of thing, to make what we do bring compatible with what the needs of the country are. So we try and attend to illnesses or situations that are current and prevalent in Ethiopia, rather than our own concerns. Next slide, please. This is a book. We say we have to sort of be attuned to the culture locally. And I have to say, I haven't read this book, but this is a kind of, in a way, echoes what Neil was saying earlier. The title of this book is Handbook of African Educational Theories and Practices. Quality education must include theory and practices based on African history and culture. You know, that country, Africa, that has a homogenous culture. So, we, you know, like it's, and I think somebody in the panel, first panel, was saying the same kind of idea that all indigenous people in Canada have the same. It's a very dangerous assumption to make that culture isn't extremely local. Next, please. Oh, yes. So 3 risks. I mean, there are many risks. So importing students from Ethiopia to Toronto, next slide, please, has fostered the brain drain. One of the extraordinary big surprises of TAC, we had no idea that we would really have much effect on the brain drain. When we started, 80% of young professionals left the country and really never came back. They were looking for higher education. By starting this program, or by expanding this program, we have a 95% retention rate within the country, which kind of was a wonderful, unexpected result. It's another risk is to export our curricula, export our exams and accreditation. You know, when you look at what a general surgeon is expected to do in Ethiopia, it's a much wider scope of practice than would be accredited in North America. So we're looking for local accreditations, East African, Horn of Africa kind of accreditations, rather than looking to the West. And again, we co-develop curricula with our colleagues who lead because they know what they need. Then we take, before COVID, we were taking 100 University of Toronto faculty over a year, not all in one bunch, but scattered in these different up to a month trainings. And what we try and do, of course, people are attracted there. Nobody's paid for this. The funding actually is important. As people have noted, funding has an enormous amount to do with what happens on the ground. We've laughed and we've said, we've gone on for so long because we have no funding. And it's true. The flights and the hotel where people stay has been paid by the Ethiopian government through various schemes of payment. So it's real skin in the game for our Ethiopian colleagues and the government there, and they can stop the project anytime if they decide not to pay for the airfares and the accommodation. It's changing a bit now. We've got some more recent funding, but for the last 19 years, we've just gone on the goodwill of the Ethiopian university and government. And we try very hard to brief our people. Actually, we have 5-hour briefings. It always stuns me that people not just come, which is we kind of make mandatory, but they really have a reflective interest in looking at the kind of issues that we're talking about. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Neil, you're muted.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, no, it does really set us up for discussion, and I already see some active discussion between our panelists with Jill and Elise, with a couple of people who've engaged. So yeah, well, let's start off with responses from Jill and Elise and open things up through the chat. Once again, at least as a start, we won't have you unmute yourself to ask the question, but if it turns out that we don't have too many people in the chat, then we can probably even have you unmute yourself to explain more directly. So go ahead.
Okay, Jill, should I start? I'll jump in. So yeah, thank you so much, Claire. And I really appreciate that we had time to hear and for you to share about this initiative, because it has so many components of what we talk about as good practice in global health partnership work. including that longevity, that view to the future, thinking back to the CCGHR principles, accountability, responsiveness to a real need. And also, one of the last things you mentioned is the way in which the project is contingent on that collaboration with the university and the Ethiopian government. And one of the things that I think that is really needed, and that I was hoping to flag as I was thinking this is an opportunity to talk about in our experiences, what is still lacking, what is still needed, what has to happen next. And certainly part of it is not only in the control of Canadians or people in high income countries. I mean, part of it also has to do with governments in low and middle income countries making it a priority to create opportunities for their researchers to have government support for partnerships they're seeking or for research they're leading. But there is a lot, of course, that as high income countries we can do. And one of the other areas that really is of concern to me in terms of global health partnerships, and I'm more on the research side, is the way in which we do continue to reinscribe the power and historical power of Canadian leadership. For example, through our Tri-Council funding of global health research partnerships, where we don't allow transfer of funds to research leads who are co-PIs in low and middle income countries. PIs are not allowed to be remunerated within Tri-Council policy. And so we continue to reposition people based in Canada as, you know, the PIs and the leaders. And as a result, I think as a result, Canada, along with the US and the UK, continue to be really big. We don't do well when it comes to author parasitism. I saw, Claire, that you really have this great co-authorship, and the topics you put up there on the slide in terms of publications show not only co-authorship, but really clearly that the discussions in the agenda are collaborative, are co-created, are part of the dialogue and the exchange. But unfortunately, Canada does not perform that well. As global health researchers, we continue to have a lot of publications where there's no representation from those countries where the research is being conducted. And when there is, it's not as first author. So yeah, those are some of my key concerns. In terms of what needs to change as well, I'll just say one last thing before handing things over to Jill. Putting up in the chat, Frans Fanon's from the Wretched of the Earth, his statement about decolonization, that decolonization really is a complete system overhaul. And there's just so many layers at which that has to happen. I hope we have time to discuss Felix's comment about how that needs to happen, both in low and middle income countries and in the Canadian context. But we're not, you know, we do need to go beyond reflexivity, and we do need to open up space for actually shaking up the narratives of what's wrong in terms of global health partnerships, because high-income countries have been dominating the discussion about how to decolonize, which obviously we need to be listening a lot more to partners and thinking, and in those partnerships also thinking about who are the partners. Are we only engaging with elites? Who has the opportunity to really inform our discussions about global health equity? I know that I just published an article that is saying that I've made the mistake of thinking I've engaged, and I've engaged with researchers and people in research institutes, but then when it came to other participants with limited literacy, they had not been engaged early on, and my project ended up really failing to be participatory in a way that's expected. So thinking carefully about what we mean about engagement and listening to avoid reinscribing narratives of why and how global inequities are limited is extremely important. So I hope there's time to hear from others in the audience, because otherwise I'm just doing it again. Jill.
Yeah. Can I say something that just caught my attention? You mentioned that as expected, the research did not go as expected. What are your expectations and what was your level of community engagement and involving government as well as local leaders to engage in that research?
Yeah, so that particular project was perceptions of Ebola clinical research. And the project was developed with the National Research Ethics Committee of Guinea, along with researchers in Guinea. So, but it did not have, and then it ended up having a number of interviews with Ebola survivors. And the planned outputs for the project had not been developed in dialogue with those Ebola survivors. So it wasn't in the budget. And what they wanted was a workshop to improve their rights as research participants. And that wasn't in our budget for the project because we had kind of set out to develop tools for use by the National Research Ethics Board and the governments of the Ebola affected countries. I did end up luckily being able to get IDRC funding to develop those workshops and toolboxes, and that one is really collaborative with the Ebola survivors. But yeah, the project itself, you know, we think it's engaged, it passes as engaged and participatory with the funder. And yet you get on the ground and like who you've excluded some very important players as well.
The very people that you want to learn from.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to co-develop some of those programs. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lilian Niwagawa. I lead the Center for Global Health at New York Institute of Technology in New York. And when Neil was talking about the decolonization of global health and all that, I remember just a few years ago, a young girl who had just finished high school went to Uganda and actually put on a white coat and started taking care of children. And 105 of them died. And they are suing her in Uganda, but of course she's in the US and they can't reach her. And so, I mean, when we start doing this kind of work, going into some of these countries that may not understand, you know, some of the ethical challenges that, you know, you have to deal with, we have to really involve governments and explain to them what we are doing. And they also have a responsibility to protect people, but half of the stuff they don't understand it. You know, if they see a person in a white coat presenting herself as a doctor, you know, people will start going to the clinic or the center or whatever. So really we have, as global health professionals, I think we have a huge responsibility in even if you see your colleague doing something that's not quite to standard, talk to them and say, hey, you know, did you get approval from the ethics board? And, you know, what did they say about what you are doing or that kind of thing? So I look at us who practice in the West as double agents, and we can always collaborate with you to kind of understand some of the pitfalls that may come up as we do the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Yeah, that is really horrifying. And I can think of one student that I was asked to help mentor, but she'd already been to a certain African country where as not even a medical student, as a pre-med student, she said she was just in the labor and delivery area and just ended up doing more than a dozen deliveries in a summer. And it did horrify me. But when I brought it up with people who were supposed to be supervising in her undergrad course, they actually weren't so supportive of me. It was more saying, yeah, well, she got experience. And this is just like 5-6 years ago. Anyway, so as we move on, Jill has some observations, and I'm glad you've been engaging in in conversations. But after you speak, if Felix and Margaret want to say something, because they've been saying things in the chat, and then you can raise your hand if you want to do things, and we'll let you know when you can unmute if you've got other comments and questions. So go ahead, Jill.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the wonderful dialogue that's already happening, and Lillian, for your comment. Elise, I've had the same experience with recognizing a research project didn't engage with the people that I really needed to engage with as well, and it's one of those things that happens. I think from my point of view as a medical educator, working in a faculty of medicine where we have medical students, we have residents, we have all sorts of people wanting to engage in global health, I sometimes have made myself a little bit unpopular because of my refusal to sort of sanction the kinds of things that we've just been talking about here. People getting experience at the expense of our colleagues or of populations in low-income countries, projects that don't really work in partnership with governments and with local systems. And I think I had mentioned to Claire before that I was really taken with the quote she had in her presentation about Westernization under the guise of better teaching. We also have to be cautious about exporting our system as if it works the best. And I know many years ago, this is an experience that was actually my husband's experience. We worked in Nepal back in the 80s on a project the University of Calgary was part of. And they realized that family medicine was not appropriate in rural Nepal. Family medicine practitioners didn't have the scope to do what was needed in a rural remote setting. So a different kind of residency program was developed at Tribhuvan University, and it was called the MDGP program, and they were training generalists to do a smattering of everything. And so my husband's involvement with the University of Calgary was to help get that going. And we were there 3 years, and he was the primary person working on that project. So I'm borrowing his experience here. But 30 some years later, we've maintained a relationship with Nepal, and that program is still going. And it's going completely run by Nepali faculty, Nepali staff. There's been no Canadian involvement since that initial few years back in the 80s. And it's really quite wonderful to see. And so we have an example of TAC that's coming up to 20 years. These kinds of programs that endure because of local buy-in and because of local champions. And it's about recognizing that's what needs to happen. And it's about building a system that meets the needs of the people in the population. A lot of the programs I talk about with my learners, with medical students and with residents, is the value of task sharing, which happens in a lot of low-income countries. We forget that sometimes you don't need a physician to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe you just need a really good technician, and you need somebody who can perform that role and meet that health need. And so being willing to learn from our partners in low-income countries where task sharing, task shifting has been happening for many years, we could be actually learning about how to save money in our own systems and how we could actually be benefiting people and increasing population health. So from a medical education point of view, we've been grappling with this. I'm a co-chair of the Global Health Network at the Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada. And as a group, we've been very concerned about how to make our global health programming about equity and about awareness and about generating knowledge about what needs to happen to make global health a more equitable space globally, and how to make room for our partners. And I think that's very important. And I'll just respond. I'm going to turn it over to the lively chat, but I just wanted to respond to something that Felix said in the chat about being an MPH student and talking lively talk in the classroom and learning all kinds of great things in the classroom about equity in global health, and then going back to sort of regular status quo practice and the importance of not letting that happen. And I think as a global health educator, that's the biggest challenge that I hope that I can overcome going forward with learners in all capacities. But it's really wonderful to see this great dialogue happening and to share with all of you. So I'm going to open it up for the question about what needs to happen now, what needs to happen next, where do we still need to go?
Great. So Felix, if you wanted to unmute yourself to elaborate or to respond, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Those were great comments, Jill. And I'm an MPH student from Kenya, and I have been somehow active in following this discussion. So what I posted there is one of the observations that I noticed, because in class we explore these things, we are fired up, and some of our teachers are really great. I mean, they have great roles in global health work. But then even the commentaries that we publish, like for example, for me, I did a commentary to the Lancet, which was published, and being invited even in the university to give a talk, and sometimes I'm introduced as an expert, but which is not true. Like, I'm not an expert. I mean, my teachers should be the ones, they are the ones who introduce me to this, but they don't have a commentary somewhere in the big journals. They do not comment, they don't have, I mean, I don't see their publications to the NIH or to the equivalent of the NIH in Canada. If I searched online, I would find their global health work, but I wouldn't find a letter they have written to the local newspaper, to the journals. But then somehow the lower grade academics, or the ones who are, some of us who are coming up, they are the ones who are like doing these or writing these here and there. But then they are the same ones who teach us, and they are actually very equally, they are very knowledgeable to talk about these things. But somehow everybody is cautious about, I don't know if they are cautious, but I would say it's not there. And lastly, the last point I would say is, since to decolonize also, the people have to notice, to notice that they are in this situation that is not favorable, and to recognize it as such. And by the people, I mean the people that we serve on the ground, not necessarily the NGO representatives, who also have their vested interest, because any system has people who are privileged in a way. So in the low-income countries, these may be the people who have an NGO here or there, the people who are able to attend this meeting here and get a contact, and they are going to pull money. But those are not actually maybe the best people, because then they are also benefiting from this to get their views. How do we involve the people in the villages in conversations, so that how do they conceive of this issue of being in an unfair system? Do they see it as we see it? Because some of them may not agree with us. They may say, no. They may be harmed more through what we are proposing. So how do we get them to have these conversations and get their views, and not necessarily the views of the representatives who also have vested interests, and who we are channeling, we are trying to incorporate through the diversity programs. So just thinking loudly, and thank you for this forum.
Thanks, Felix. We'll get Margaret perhaps really briefly, and then have our final word with our panelists. I know Claire has to do some teaching in 2 minutes. So Margaret, if you could be brief, and then we'll get a brief response from our panelists, and then we have to move on to the third panel. Yes. Oh, is she offline now, Margaret?
Sorry, which Margaret you call? My name is Margaret. I didn't ask to speak yet.
Okay.
Myself or not?
No, I just saw Margaret, who had been in the chat, that if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wrote something about the University of Sangor. Maybe
Yeah.
myself. Okay, just briefly. The idea of a brain drain is extremely important, but also we are talk about the publication. And decolonize, from my point of view, is to be able to help our colleagues who are not able to understand the way you speak and think in English. I'm a Brazilian person. I speak 4 different languages. And each time that I talk with a friend from another country, I needed to immerse myself in the way they organize their thoughts. The way you write in the scholarly way does not make sense for myself as Brazilian. So I have a new exercise. So I believe that is really important. You saw in the chat, I put the name of a new journal that will open. And one of the most important tasks for us is to promote social inclusion of all actors for different parts of the world, because we need to acknowledge that the way people from different parts of the world, they build their knowledge, they see the reality, the way they think is not the Anglo-Saxon way. You need absolutely to stop, to continue this hiding way to colonize people's minds and share our technical knowledge, how to develop the scholarly writing skills. Maybe a simple workshop that is even the way you are teaching our year one students at university. How to scholarly write is nothing special, only share our skills with them. And then I think that would be a good point for us to even maybe another moment, listen our graduate students from Africa in other countries, how they suffer, try to write a scholarly way here, for example, in North America. I suffered this, I'm here in Canada for almost 25 years, continuous suffering, and the only person who could edit my papers is a Francophone editor, because she thinks in a Latin way. So I can understand people in France, from Italy. So that is different things. So you talk about people from Africa, Asian continents, and you need to be more socially inclusive and recognize that the decolonization means respect the people, original and specific way of thinking and develop knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. So we are now into hour 3, but could we get a brief response if you wanted from any of our panelists? Final words from Claire first, and then the other two, because I know Claire should be off at her other lecture.
Thank you. Wonderful comments, both written and shared with the group. Thank you. I'm going to be controversial, Dr. Margaret, and say I agree it would be helpful if people in low-income countries learned scholarly writing skills, because frankly, that's the way the world works. But I'm, as a psychiatrist, privileged to work in a low-income country. I think my job is to sit at the knees of the traditional healers and to learn their secrets and their techniques. We try and make everybody West. And I think that really the world does need to turn over. And I think I have a very privileged position that I can say that out loud to the psychiatry residents in Addis, because they all want to learn scholarly writing, and they will. But also we have to really pay attention to what's already here and what already works. Thanks. Thanks, Neil. Great opportunity.
Jill or Elise, did you want to comment on any of these things?
I think everything has been been a wonderful dialogue, and I'm just trying to catch up with the chat. So I think, Elise, if you have any last words, go ahead. This has been great. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, Richard just suggested a WhatsApp forum. Richard, I think that's a great idea. I think then we can talk about this 24/7. And I don't, I mean, please, by all means, feel free to start it. I'll put my number here if anybody wants to put me on the WhatsApp. But I guess like this just kind of goes to show how much discussion is going on. Thank you, Neil, for thinking of putting this together. And obviously we need like an afternoon, maybe at the Canadian Global Health Conference, or a whole, or at Pegasus, your next conference. There's obviously so many layers to this conversation about what is decolonization and how do you move from these various institutional points to action. I really appreciate how much we've talked about institutional and systemic issues, because you started with reflexivity and thinking about helping and needing to question that, Neil. But you know, we're not bad at reflexivity, but the system is still totally broken. So yeah, thank you.
Hope someone keep all these numbers, phone numbers, huh? When you close the
Yeah,
show.
we'll manage
Please
that.
pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So so thank you, everybody. We better get started on our third panel. And some of the things that we have for the third panel will reflect on what you've said here. So thank you for all the people who are disappearing now. I think that Jill and Lisa may still be on. And maybe our third panel people can show their video. And the people who aren't on the panel, if you could shut down your video, if you wouldn't mind. It makes it easier for us as we're arranging for different things. So what I'm going to do here is I will try to introduce our panelists in a second. But before we do that, I wanted to let people know a little bit more about Pegasus. And so I think that we see if this works here. See if the slideshow works this time. Okay, is this working now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't before. So Pegasus, to let you know, the organizer of this event stands for Peace, Global Health, and Sustainability. We look at global health at its nexus with peace and sustainability. Our mission: to provide a world where peaceful interaction provides for sustainable global health. Equity and justice are very important to us as we got started. For those of you interested, we have a summer institute planned with McGill University on peace, health, and sustainability. And this is May 24th to June 10th. So we have the first week, we've got a course on peace through health, on health work, how health work can contribute to peace. And we have a number of really well-known experts from around the world, and Imperatrice from El Salvador, Isildine, originally from Gaza, but now in Toronto, Samer at the American University in Beirut, Frederica from South Africa, doing work on mental health and psychosocial support as it relates to peace building. Barry Levy, who's edited a few books on war and public health. So really world leaders in terms of all of these topics. You can find more information from our Pegasus website, or just look up McGill Pegasus Summer Institute. We'll have a few Nobel Peace Prize winners, so I encourage you to register if you have an interest in that. In between our two courses, we have another course that's part of our institute on decolonizing humanitarian assistance, which might be of special interest to this group. And then the June 6th to 10th week, we've got a course on environment and human health. And once again, we've got a British knight, Andy Haynes, has been head of London School of Hygiene, Teresa McClanahan from the Canadian Environmental Law Association, David Heyman, who's been WHO consultant on Ebola and many other infectious diseases, Trevor Hancock, who founded the Green Party in Canada and led Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, Kalpana Balakrishnan from India, an environmental epidemiologist, Esther Yazid Lewis, an Indigenous leader from New Mexico, Teodoro Diallo at the Université de Québec, Montréal. And so once again, you can find more information on our website about the course. So I hope everybody registers here and you share that with others. And then we've had different projects, again, looking at things related to equity. We have a project involving collaborators in Canada, Tanzania, El Salvador, and Quito, Ecuador, on gender-based violence and data gaps. We have a project on environmental toxins and racialized populations, a project on why Indigenous policing might be different. And that's one that Dorothy, one of our panelists, is leading. Then we've got a group working on Afghan health and peace. And we're part of a global alliance on war, conflict, and health. We have our Francophone network. So I see that we've got a few people here who are Francophone, concentrating more on Francophone Africa in particular, and issues related to global health at its nexus with peace and sustainability there. We're having a launch of this meeting on Wednesday at noon Eastern time, if people are interested. Chloe, whose picture you see 3 times here, is coordinating the group. And our Latin American group, Jacqueline, who was part of the first panel, is working with Berlin and Imperatriz from Ecuador and El Salvador, as well as Cheryl in Ecuador from Canada, coordinating the network. And we've got people from several different countries. So yeah, so we encourage you to get involved with that, and you can send me a private message if you wanted in the chat, or send me an email, and I'll have the email at the end for you. So our third panel is on engagement with underserved and unheard voices. And I just realized as I share my screen, I won't have the bios I can bring up on each of our speakers. So maybe what I may do is either I stop sharing the screen for a second, which I may do, and then go to some of the official bios, or I just briefly introduce people in what I know of them. So Gertrude is on our board with a master's in public health from the University of Alberta. Tremendous experience in various African contexts, and she wants to speak as a racialized Canadian who's worked in the Global South. Melissa, our executive director of Pegasus Institute, has a master's in health geography from Western University, worked with communities in different parts of the world, in Tanzania primarily, for several years with an NGO that she will tell you about. And then came back to work with me, and has worked with me for the last 13 years. She's worked with Regional HIV/AIDS Connection in London, Ontario. And in her various roles, she has an interest in populations that are more underserved or vulnerable or marginalized, both in the Canadian context as well as overseas. And she'll apply her lens of cultural competence as we discuss these things. Dorothy Larkman, also on our Pegasus board, who did the land acknowledgement at the beginning, is the acting director of social work at Nipissing University, and finishing up her PhD at the University of Waterloo. Dorothy is an Indigenous leader and a great leader in Pegasus. So we really benefit from her wisdom here. And Shauna Ahern, finally, the director of the Global Health Office at Dalhousie University for many years, and also a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo. Again, extensive international experience, but Shauna will bring the perspective more of someone who has worked within a medical school on issues of social accountability and led a lot of discussions at an academic level. So that's what we're hoping to get from each of our panelists. I will go back to sharing my screen here, and we will get there. And go to slideshow. And now this is working as it didn't before. So we're encouraging you as participants to reflect on how we best engage with populations that are underserved and unheard in the most respectful and equitable ways. What are differences in engaging with underserved and underheard populations, and what does it mean to be an ally? And is this the most optimal term to use? And this Dorothy has looked at allyship, particularly with Indigenous communities. So I'm going to start this off with my own experience from 35 years ago almost. as a medical student. And as you look through these things, you might get a sense of how not to do. And this is coming as a person who knew himself as being racialized and was acutely aware growing up in smaller town Canada. But I went to Tanzania as a third-year medical student in 1988, spent some time at the Aga Khan Hospital in Dar es Salaam with a pediatrician, did well baby and child clinics and weighing kids, and then looking at the inpatient ward. And then after a couple of weeks, I met some other people, a Canadian and a Scandinavian, and they said, "Oh, we're working at Moimbili. You might be interested in spending time there." So then I did talk to somebody who allowed me to observe in terms of their internal medicine clinic. I wanted to see a system that was more public than the Aga Khan. And then after a little while, they said, "Oh, well, you know, if you hang around the obstetrics ward, you might actually get to deliver a baby." And I had never done a delivery. This is a high risk setting because most deliveries at that time were at home in Tanzania. And then I was just invited on to the obstetrical ward. And I did deliver my first baby because the intern and the staff person were busy doing a C-section. The nurse, who had had far more experience than me, ended up, she was coaching and nothing went wrong there. But again, it really sounds horrific right now. Later, I spent time with Mother Teresa's institution in Delhi, a few different things. I did meet Mother Teresa at the time. That was the thing to do. We went to the slums and people would tell us, "I've got a cough," or "I've got a fever." And the nuns were giving medicines for those types of things. And again, they asked me for advice as a medical student. They actually often didn't have medical training. And there we were trying to go through supposedly to do good. And with an underserved population, went with McGill medical students in 2004 with a friend who had been part of an NGO. This institution was actually pretty well designed in many ways, and the students were well oriented to the culture and to specifics there. The NGO that they worked with had been working on the ground for many, many years, and there was follow-up. But once again, I was thrust into this situation where we were meeting with people. There had been a flood. People were dealing with very difficult social situations, and the medical students were relying on me to cope. This doesn't look like I'm the most bright one there. And this woman had experienced tremendous trauma. And so the medical student there was saying, "Oh, we need to give this person Paxil," because he had read in his book that for depression you give Paxil. And so that wasn't the way that we handled things, partly because of different experience of some of us, but that's really what happens on many medical missions. My wife has worked in Ecuador for 3 years on health promotion near Chimborazo and the area of Riobamba, for those who know Ecuador. And she did a lot of good things as a nurse and nurse practitioner, again, doing education, but that was a longer term sustained engagement. She also went with MSF in South Sudan. Again, very specific type of engagement, not meant to have people who are culturally competent when you go there, or even necessarily fully understand the context in what's supposed to be a humanitarian situation. So we can talk about the pluses and minuses of these type of engagement and how they do or do not involve local people or this vulnerabilized, underserved, marginalized population. And probably the experience for me that got me to reflect most on these things was doing a lecture in Palestine on determinants of health. And I talked about this first baby that I had delivered. And then somehow the topic came up of what was happening in the students' lives. In Palestine, because of various blockades, the students they arranged all the classes within 2 days in Ramallah because people couldn't always come there. And then one of the students talked about tear gassing, and every single student had been tear gassed. And the women carried onions in their purse, which was meant to be lacrimogenic to help with things. Some people had been tear gassed 10 times. And I realized here I am lecturing to people about determinants of health, and I don't really understand their context. And that was a real eye-opener to me. We developed this book with Jess Everett from Child and Family Health International on global health experiential education from theory to practice, meant to look at ethics and pedagogy. And in that, we have a section on host perspectives, including some research that we did, a literature survey with Lmic, who was a panelist in the second panel, and some other people, both Global North and South. You can look up that book if you're interested. There are 3 chapters that I'm going to just go over a few quotes from, just to get you to reflect, but I think that some of these have already been addressed with comments on previous panels, but I'm going to look at research that I did with my wife Carolyn, whom I had mentioned there, and then the brief survey of the literature with Lmic, and then another reflective piece that I have in the book. So this research that we did, we looked at 17 people who accepted Canadian trainees from 14 countries. This is available freely through the web without having to purchase the book, and you can email me if you have trouble getting that. So again, from different parts of the world, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and they'd all taken Canadian trainees. And here were some of their observations. And of course, speaking to us, they were largely positive because at that time I directed the global health program. But I picked out a few things that just struck me at the time. And so I'll just read a few things that hopefully will start off our discussion. So this one person said, there's still in developed countries, there's this idea that they're here to change things for the better in their own way. And another one, so we tried our best to get a translator to work with them. This was difficult because anyone in our organization who spoke English was usually a fairly senior person. So we had to free that person up from other duties in order to be with a student. This one here, they confirmed in November. And then the next March, when we had everything ready for them, we actually started a project with them. 1 month before they were supposed to come, they told us they weren't going to come. But we make our annual budget based on the number of volunteers coming. This year, even though no groups cancel, this year one of the universities decided to bring half the volunteers they were supposed to. And this is an organization dependent on funding. They made this commitment to support 18 children. They told us they were going to do the event in February, and they'd give us the money after that. And then in March, we contacted them and asked them what happened. And they said they couldn't do the event, but they were going to continue doing small fundraising events so they could raise some money. At the end of April, they said they only had $750, which was 1/5 of the donation they were supposed to give us. And this was just for food for kids. And we were counting on that. And then they said they actually were supporting something in another continent. And another thing from another host, I just feel that there needs to be a way to appropriately compensate the host. This is actually a Canadian who had been in another country and worked many years there. And within our system at my university, when I directed the Global Health Office, we paid preceptors in Canada but didn't overseas. We didn't even offer them academic recognition, although I did manage to get that for one person. We told host organizations that they had to have a few $1 million in insurance when they were taking our students. So this is, and we were supposed to be role modeling equity for students. And then, so another preceptor said, if you're coming to us, we should also be able to come to you. But as Elise and I found out in a survey of the literature, Simpson quoted, the processes that allow young Westerners to access the financial resources and moral imperatives necessary to travel and volunteer in a third world country, in quotes, are the same as the ones that make the reverse process almost impossible. And once again from Green, that basically Guatemalan patients tended to put their faith in a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned foreign physician or student more than their Guatemalan physicians. And from a Guatemalan surgeon who was interviewed by the same person, they saw patients over a weekend and provided medications without any records or understandable explanations to the patients of why they needed the medications. He said those same patients came to his health post the following week, unable to explain what was done and why they were taking medication, forcing him to repeat their exams without any benefit to the patient or the system. From another informant that we had for our research, they used information to advance research and used it without the opinion or consent of the source of information. And it happened to them several times. And students come for internships and sometimes observational, and then they just began to collect data. And we hope that's not happening now, that people just decide that as people coming from the north, they can go to the south and do things that we wouldn't be allowed to do here. And somebody else said, I was Googling something, I found my name somewhere that they've done a certain research. How can you put my name on some kind of paper, which I haven't cleared or wasn't even aware of? And this was from Court in our survey of the literature, talking about being on papers, some that this person had never read, and people involved where research was conducted said about the people in those countries, if they knew the hypotheses and research questions, it would bias the results. Those of us from the global north being the people without biases. But scientific production all over the world follows the pattern of core periphery relationships in which the contribution of the periphery, including developing regions like sub-Saharan Africa, is marginal and dependent upon structure and infrastructure accessible through collaborative projects led by institutions and scientists from the core regions. And so again, this, I wonder if our panelists might see also reflects some research, at least historically, with Indigenous populations of Canada, and hopefully we're moving beyond that. This really related to a study by an undergraduate student from Stanford, Tiffany Kung, talking about this particular organization, saying that really the people on the board in terms of decision making aren't the people from the South. And so this is with a very well-known, generally very good functioning multinational organization. But again, people from the North are the decision makers. And this was from Christian Craker from McMaster University, that one of his informants from Mozambique, or no, it wasn't Mozambique, Namibia, said, I think most people look at Africa as a museum of disease. So whatever they write about, they see the stages of disease here, the tropical diseases, which I'm assuming they don't have back home. I think they're here because of the laxity in our laws. And they come here because they get opportunities to touch the patients, to do procedures and everything. A little bit like me, I've got to say, in Tanzania. Oh, we're on to your slides then, Melissa, is that right? I thought I had one more thing, but anyway, these are just meant to get you to reflect on different parts of what we're going to talk about engaging with different populations. So I stop my presenting role and turn this over to our panelists then. So sorry it took a little bit longer than I had intended. Dorothy, any response, or how would you view these issues? It's interesting because you come from different perspectives, of course, right now being a student and a teacher, as well as a person from a community and sending people into communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been interesting listening, I must say, to the conversation that's been going on throughout the afternoon. And I was, as I was listening, what I was going to be expressing kept shifting and moving around, and even to the point of right now. And so my experience as a student has, and I've always expressed this, is that I'm going into a foreign institution, even though I've been born and raised in Canada. The institution itself, especially post-secondary, is a foreign institution, and I still experience that doing my PhD. And all of the pieces that are put into place within the institution to try to accommodate or look after or provide the space for Indigenous students, because I am Indigenous, to become part of or have a sense of belonging, don't always accomplish what they set out to do. And part of that reasoning, I believe, from what my own personal experiences, is because they don't have those grassroots people within those boards or those ways of coming together. And so they're instituting what their ideas generally are. Not to say that those changes that have come through have come from, been pushed from political bodies, Indigenous political bodies, to create those changes, but how they get applied becomes the issue, I believe, personally. And now that I'm in a teaching role in social work and providing the Indigenous aspects of social work to students that are coming through to get their undergrad, even the way of teaching, the style of teaching is so different than what I call mainstream ways of teaching. The students express that difference, and they express the that understanding of equity or equality within the classroom. I use the circle all the time because that's what I've been taught to use, and so everybody gets to express and be part of. Within the pandemic, of course, that's been a little bit more difficult, being online and utilizing that, but it's still a form that I use because it creates that connection with everybody within the class, as long as they're able to participate in even online. And so when I'm listening to these conversations, I'm like, yeah, I can connect with a lot of what's being expressed. It's much like I'd love to go traveling and go to some of these places, but I'd like to know more about them before I go, and so I'm not tripping over any protocols that I should be knowing and understanding. And so that's part of what I was invited to speak about, was that word ally, and how I'm proposing that needs to change. We can't be calling ourselves allies. When you look at the word itself in the English language, my mother's original language was Anishinaabe, and so that word ally is conjures up fighting and wars and all of those things, and not necessarily a coming together to be together kind of thing. And so getting away from that word, and the only word that we could come up with, and I say we because I had a conversation with an elder, Peter Schuler from the Mississauga First Nation, as well as Dr. McCarthy from the University of Waterloo, about this terminology. And so the only word we came up with was a word that meant a mutual helping. And it's an Ojibwe word, an Anishinaabe word. And so it relates to the ethic, our indigenous ethic of non-interference, where people come together, not because we're trying to push them into something, but they come there because they're interested and they want to, and they can have they believe they have something to offer to the group as a whole. And when we're looking at globally, the sustainability of the environment for us globally is needed. And so I believe more will be happening just like today, where we're all coming together to talk about these differences and how can we alleviate and make it so that we're listening to each other and providing for each other the gifts that we've been honored to have and carry, so that we can look after the earth, our mother, and create that sustainable environment for everybody. But that's just coming from an indigenous perspective, indigenous, I'll have to say, I guess I have to say, a Canadian indigenous perspective, an Anishinaabe perspective, worldview of how we want to look at things or work with things. And yeah, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Really important words. Gertrude.
Thank you, Neil. Hello, everyone, and thank you for sticking with us this long. As Neil and Melissa have already mentioned, my name is Gertrude Amaro. I'm a Kenyan-born Canadian who works in international development for the larger part of the decade. My work has taken me to various countries, Uganda, Malawi, and in my current work as a WHO consultant under Bloomberg's funded project, I support 14 countries in alleviating the burden of cardiovascular disease. As many of the presenters have stated, great strides are being taken in Canada to work towards more equitable partnerships in various spheres. I thought it would be interesting for us to maybe look at what partnerships means in international development from a perspective of someone who is in the diaspora. Just so we can have the same context of a diaspora, it means the movement, migration, or scattering of people away from our established or ancestral home. And I think this perspective is very unique in Canada, as 1 in 3 Canadians are currently foreign-born, and this is expected to increase to about 30% by 2030. And the immigrants in Canada are playing they play a very significant role in development. And according to IMF, currently in the sub-Saharan Africa, the amount of remittance, which is the money that people send back home to their family and friends, surpasses foreign direct investments and foreign aid received. And in 2019, before COVID-19, IMF estimated that in the continent, they received about 47 billion in 2019, and 20% of those being from high income countries, which also means that 40% were from people of origin countries, but in neighboring countries or in low income countries. And so for me, in looking at those various statistics, the few questions that I had posed to the group that I thought would be good for discussion would be, for example, who works in development? From that perspective, whose perspectives do they represent? And what are the benefits? As many of presenters have talked about the benefits, such as scholarships, a career, and the impact. What actually moves the needle forward, and what is leading to change on the ground? And for me, I'm very curious as to your perspectives on that, as it's already been determined that Diaspora for Development, which is a strategy by the UN, is the leading approach being followed forward after COVID-19 in terms of development. Do you think that is applicable? Do you think that is relevant in the context post-COVID? I'd like to know your inputs. And further, for me, as being someone who is racialized or who is of the continent, and I work in the continent, for me, it's been very unique to work in that space because of my identity and what I represent. And one of the questions that I keep getting in various forms is, why did you come back? And that's a question that I've received, for example, from the women that we are working in Malawi in terms of promoting nutrition for mothers. I've received this in Uganda when we were bringing health services to fishermen and to reduce HIV rates. And it's a context that I'm very curious as to what the perspectives is of the people joining in terms of being a racialized person in development, and who do I represent to people and who do I represent to myself. And I think maybe I'll pass it on to Melissa, and we can open up the discussions Just as we have 15 minutes, I won't go into much detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Gertrude. So before Melissa begins her presentation, I should let you know about me meeting her in Tanzania when I directed the Global Health Office at Western. And so she was there working with this small NGO that was related to Western in some way. And I saw in her the first time, she was in her early 20s. I think she must have been close to 25. And what I saw really role model a lot of behaviors I hadn't seen in anyone else. And again, being racialized like Gertrude and Dorothy, I felt, well, we had more of an understanding of other people as we related. But Melissa related very differently to the people around her, and really truly collaborated. And I saw that within a few months, she actually learned how to speak Swahili. We don't expect people from the global north going to other countries to learn the language, whereas Canadians often expect people who come to this country to learn English or French within 2 years. But she role modeled a lot of behaviors, and later got her to lecture and then write articles about language and cultural competency. So I think that's going to be the focus of a few slides, and then she may have other reflections.
Thanks so much, Neil, and thank you to the other panelists. So let's start to a really interesting discussion in all different perspectives. So I'm really excited about this. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own experiences in terms of my work in East Africa, and talk a little bit more about cultural safety. And in the past, I taught a bit about cultural competency, which is actually something a little bit different. And cultural safety was brought to my attention, and I look back and it's something that I actually learned over time. And I didn't know the label for it, and I just kind of, it just felt right to me. I originally went to Tanzania to do my master's research and to engage with the project through a university. And I arrived in Tanzania by myself, and I didn't speak the language, and I didn't really know what was going around me. I knew a few things from talking to a few people before, but I really didn't understand the world around me. And I was thrown in there, and I felt super uncomfortable because I wasn't able to communicate with the people that I was working with. So I was placed with one project and a local grassroots organization called Kibalini that worked worked to prevent domestic violence in the community. And over time, I started to ask questions, and I started to become more curious, and I wanted to learn Swahili, and I wanted to know, what are the people that we're working with and that we're providing services for, and what are they thinking? What do they want? How does it work practically on the ground for them? These were the questions that were happening in my mind, but I was at the point where I wasn't able to kind of engage with that because I needed to learn. So I did whatever I could to learn Swahili. I asked friends, I made friends, I talked to anybody I could, I listened, I sat and made chapatis for hours with a local women's group that I worked with, just to hear the language and how people interact in the society. I basically was listening and absorbing. And for me, that was a big aspect of what I was doing in Tanzania, and I wanted to be there to learn. I knew as a student and someone who was doing quote unquote research, which is a whole other thing to talk about, that I didn't have a lot to offer these people because I didn't understand their context, and I just wanted to know more about it. So I had an open mind and an open heart, and I just wanted to learn as much as I could and create that space for somebody else's perception as well and the people around me. So again, cultural safety, I was practicing right from the beginning, just because the way things that were set up through the projects in the school program that I went to, it didn't sit right with me. Really short internships or stays, and not really engaging in a way that is long-term or sustainable, or even takes a look at the reflections of what's going on around us and the impact that we're having on the ground. So over time, I just did as much as I could, like I said, and I was there for the amount of time that I was supposed to be. And I said, no, I need to stay longer. There's more to do. There's more to learn. And I just kept working with people. And to me, that sharing and that learning that I had with other people, I did have people ask me things on the side, like, can you teach me English? A couple of schools asked me, can you come and tell us more about Canada? We're so interested. But at the same time, I made the point to always ask, well, if I teach you some English, would you please teach me some Swahili? And if I teach you about Canada, would you please teach me more about Tanzania and your communities? And I think this is how everybody, I know the time isn't there for everybody, but engaging in different ways, even online, prior to arriving in a country, or reading or speaking with people as much as you can is a way to engage, and keeping that open mind and open heart in working with others, and allowing other perceptions and ways of knowing and ways of doing to be the priority. In Tanzania, I didn't know everything, and I ended up eventually starting a nonprofit organization with others and other colleagues of mine who are Tanzanian. And I constantly was telling them, I'm not the expert here, you're the experts. I can help with sort of organization, and there's certain skills and abilities that I have if you want me to share them with you, but you're the experts in what works in your communities. And we often worked with the women's groups and youth groups that we were working with to gather information about what they think is actually going to work practically on the ground. Because what was happening at the university level did not make sense to me from what I was seeing on the ground, but because funding was rolling in from that side, people were trying to accommodate the donors and the university on the Western side. So it was a very interesting relationship, and I learned a lot. But I think I didn't do everything perfectly, because like I said, right from the beginning, I came not knowing anything about Tanzanian culture. I knew a little bit from reading about it, but not knowing the language, not really doing that. But I think recognizing my own biases and being there to learn and having that open mind and heart led me a long way in being able to work with people there. I ended up living and working in East Africa for about 8 years. And I find I just learned so much, and there was so much going on there that was so valuable to me. And our programs did end up being quite successful. And the ones that I worked with the grassroots education were completely successful because they were led and run by Tanzanian people. So again, going back to that. Next slide, please. Actually, I'll just skip this section, but there's many different ways that you can practice culturally safe practices within global health to meet and include and respect cultural identities of others and safely meet their needs and expectations and rights. And these are some of the ways that you can do that. Again, we'll share the slides so that in case anybody wants to review them further. Next slide, please. And there's kind of like a differences in cultural safety versus cultural awareness, sensitivity, competence, and humility. So again, the awareness is just recognizing the differences and similarities and the different histories that impact people, both in the local Canadian sense, where I also worked at Regional HIV/AIDS Connection. We worked with ACB, which is African, Caribbean, and Black communities, as well as Indigenous communities and LGBTQ communities. So we worked with different underheard and underserved populations as well, and it applies the same, I found. And then cultural sensitivity, just being like keeping your eyes open, and again, it's not about treating everybody the same, it's about awareness and responsibility to act respectfully, to listen, to give priority to other voices and other ways of knowing and doing. And then cultural competency, how do we do that? And then in terms of cultural humility, just continuing that self-reflection. What can I do to hear others further? How can we create equity continually? How can we build on that? And just continually reflecting on these. I think that's what got me through as well, a lot of my experiences. And I'm just so thankful to have learned so much while I was in East Africa. And again, I still am in communication with many people there, and I had so many experiences. People invited me to their homes. People invited me to medicine doctors. People invited me to all sorts of things that I wouldn't be able to experience if I didn't open myself up and provide that safe space for people culturally. So I've said a lot, and I would like to pass it on for open discussion if there's any time left. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got about 5 to 10 minutes if the organizers let us go on an extra 5. So I would like to open things up there. I think that Marie and Lillian had some comments in the chat. I don't know if anybody else has anything or the other panelists want to respond to you, Melissa. But I'll put this out to Dorothy and then have the others there. Like you mentioned about open minds, open hearts. Like lots of people, my students will all read. They always did read about what was going on. But I think that open heart and the cultural humility is, some of that is difficult to teach. But maybe I'll see whether Dorothy and Shauna think that that's intrinsic, or is that a teachable thing? Or what is it that you've seen in terms of people that you see engaging in the best way, and Gertrude also. So Dorothy, why don't you start off with commenting on the others' presentations, and then we'll get a couple of other brief comments, and then maybe have Lillian and Marie if they want to speak.
I think teaching that it is very difficult to do. I know that I know and realize that from teaching in the at the university level, because for Indigenous people, for the most part, I mean, we've been interrupted through the residential school systems and the 60 scoop and all of those things. But for the most part, our resilience comes through because we've been able to maintain, for the most part, that understanding of who we are in respect to keeping our connection to the land and the environment and everything around us. And so it's part of our world view, part of who we are. And so it's really hard to necessarily teach it to someone else without doing much like Melissa explained, becoming integrated into and part of the community and understanding and being willing to be open to that. And you don't always, students who are coming to you at the post-secondary level are not necessarily looking for that. They're looking more for the academic pieces of what do I have to learn to be able to have my degree and move on and do what needs to be done. And so when I'm teaching, trying to teach that concept and that understanding, really it's the understanding more that I want them to have, because they can pick up the concepts anywhere. They can go and read, but to understand and utilize it, that's a different process. And yes, it is very difficult to teach. And do my students get it? I would hope so, but I don't know that they do. And the only way to tell that they do is by going back out and I suppose and doing research and see, not research with the student, but the people they interact with, to see if they've been able to develop those skills and developing those relationships and those pieces of the social work program anyway, at least. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
I think for me, my reflection would be for the practitioners who are practicing global health to have a sense of reflection on the work that you do. And though Melissa has great points in integrating yourself in the culture, I warn against going to a culture and living there for 1 year, and because you've lived there and you can do a few things in the culture that you feel you have the best understanding or you're representative of the culture. And so, a quick antidote that I can say, that there was a project done in close to my family line, in which they were supporting women in having more economic, independence from their husbands. And so they went around telling women, I've come here, I've lived with you, and I see that you need, to be supported and be able to make your own choices in your household. But when they left, there was one woman who was, stoned to death for publicly going against her husband in public. And so, you can understand what the issue is, and you can think you have a good understanding of what the solution is. But unless you're in the culture and you have a deep understanding of, the tribals, or even in a particular thing, I guard against feeling, confident that you spent 5 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, or 10 years in a certain culture. And the only way to guard against that is, when you have a question, is to ask at least 5 whys. Why is this the issue? Or because of this, then why is this? And because of this, and not just stop at one or the second response that you do get. And that is just from my own personal view, and have seen in engaging with community members on various health issues. And I'll stop there. Neil, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kevin's given us the extra 5 minutes. So if Marie or Lillian want to say what they've said in the chat, you're welcome to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can unmute yourself, either Marie or...
I wanted to commend both Melissa and Gertrude for the work they are doing, and of course Dorothy for teaching. And for Melissa, building that culture of humility is sometimes difficult for Western, for people coming from the global North. So that's a really good thing, that you even had to learn how to make chapati, and then learn the language. I take students to different places, and before we go, we have to do intensive pre-trip orientation. And we emphasize that, in fact, all our first years get to, in medical school, they get to get the training in cultural humility and cultural competency, and all that. And every night when we are on the trips, we make sure that we debrief with the students and kind of ask them what they learned, how it made them feel, what they, how they will change their practice because of that, and those types of things. And for Gertrude, I really like your vulnerability in talking about straddling two different communities and how you navigate around them. And one of the concepts we use is brain drain, brain gain. And I kind of use it as a defense, even for myself, because I'm also from Uganda, and I came here about 30-something years ago. And it's like, I'm learning all this and bringing it back to help us do better, to help our different public health systems or health systems do better. And so I mentioned being a double agent. I can navigate both, and I can work with organizations and ministries of health and education to kind of guide them through some of the pitfalls that a lot of these types of experiences get into. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that there are a lot of people that we'd like to engage with in the future. So we do encourage you to write to Melissa, look at our Pegasus Institute webpage, think about our Latin American and Francophone networks. I hope that you've got a sense about different Canadian global health engagement, not just Pegasus, but CUGH and other organizations. I want to thank this third panel and all of our panels for really enlightening series of interventions, not just formal, but you can see a reflection of decades of experience. And I think that you also get a sense of some of the values that people have come in with, the things that are not teachable, that cultural humility, the introspection to some degree. And so I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our other participants who spoke or just were listening. So email us, and we look forward to continuing engagement. So thank you all.